And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Dr. Jeff Tarrant with us. His book, Becoming Psychic. Jeff, you had an opportunity in writing the book to talk to mediums, those people who claim that they talk to the other side. What do you think of them?
Overall, I've been extremely impressed. And I should also clarify that a lot of the mediums that I had the opportunity to work with had already gone through some sort of a certification process.
Yeah.
So, Forever Family Foundation and Windbridge.
They're already rubber stamped, right?
They're already rubber stamped. They've already, jumped through significant hoops to show that they can get information, accurate information. And so I was fortunate in that way that a lot of the people that I've worked with, they've already demonstrated their abilities. But I did see, I don't know if we have time for one real quick story.
Oh, absolutely. You're here for an hour. We have calls, but sure, go ahead.
Great. So, one of the very first experiments I did was with a medium named Laura Lynn Jackson, who's pretty well known. And at this point, I didn't know her. She didn't know me. I was at my very first conference that had anything to do with this kind of stuff. And she agreed to, I met her, she agreed to let me map her brain at the end of the conference. She didn't know anything about me. And so when I was mapping her brain, she had to do a reading for somebody, in order to see what was happening in her brain. And I said, well, why don't you just read me? Now, probably from a scientific perspective, not the best way to do it, but I'm glad I did, because she was just nailing everything about my family, my kids, just one thing after another when she was doing the psychic reading. I mean, I would say almost perfect and very specific. And then when she did the mediumship reading, she says, "Oh, I'm getting somebody. I think it's your grandpa." Like, okay, well, that's a safe bet. I'm a certain age. You could assume my grandfather's probably deceased. Okay, his name starts with, I don't know, I'm getting a J or a G. And then she says, Giuseppe, which was my grandfather's name.
And does she have any way to know that?
There's no way. And, my last name is Tarrant. You would never guess my grandfather's name was Giuseppe. Who's going to pull that out of the air?
Right.
So, some of the things like that were really impressive, right, when they can come up. And I've actually seen Laura do this over and over again with other people, come up with really specific names that, with people she's never met before. And, and not just like a John or, Jim or something like that, but, things like Oscar, where it's like, okay, you're not going to just wildly guess Oscar and get it right. So, when I see things like that, it's really impressive and certainly suggests that they're getting some sort of information from somewhere, right?
The late escape artist, Harry Houdini, was obsessed with trying to uncover false mediums. I mean, he wanted to believe, he wanted to find a good medium, but he did whatever he had to do to get the people who he claimed to be fraudulent and, hucksters and things like that. He would have loved this book.
Maybe, or he might have tried to, find all the flaws with with my arguments. I don't know.
Well, you got that doctor title, though. That to give you some credibility.
Yeah, hopefully. And, and for me, a lot of this is really about the exploration, and feeling like there's so much that we don't know. And so let's look. Let's see what's out there, and let's try some things. And to be fair, I also acknowledge that there are fraudulent huckster mediums out there who are doing cold readings and taking advantage of people. So I'm certainly not so suggestible to say that they don't exist. I think those exist. They both exist. The legitimate mediums and the fraudulent mediums.
Where does the study of this go next, Jeff? What's next, do you think?
There's a couple of things I'm interested in looking at. One is looking at the baseline EEG recordings of psychics and mediums to see if there are specific patterns that show up just when they're not doing their work. Even though I've got a lot of data, for some reason I've never quite looked at that aspect of it. seems like a basic thing to look at. I'm also interested in this idea that we were starting to get into a minute ago when we were talking about the technology-assisted classes. But I want to explore that more consistently in terms of looking at, can we, almost from like a research perspective, demonstrate that using some of these technologies can enhance psychic abilities. And then the third thing that I'm really interested in looking at is, can we demonstrate a physiological synchrony between people when they're doing like a telepathy experiment or some sort of energy healing, using heart rate variability or EEG. So those are the three things that are kind of at the top of my list.
All right, let's take some calls. We're taking calls for the rest of the hour with Dr. Jeffrey Tarrant. His book is called Becoming Psychic. Let's go to first-time caller Fernando in Paluca, Mexico. Fernando, welcome to the program.
Thanks, George. Good night. Thanks for having me.
Hola.
Hola.
Hola. Hola. Hi. Well, I'm calling about because I'm a mechatronic engineer, but I have always had this knowledge like inside of me about psychic techniques since I was a little boy. And with time, I have like repressed something of that, but from like 4 years or 5 to date, I studied a little bit like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, Silva method, and all those kinds of stuff. And I have seen like an improvement in some weird stuff that has happened in my life, like moving things and all sorts of things that I see every day, but many people don't see them until I point them to them. So that's when they go a little afraid. It's very curious. I wanted to ask you about the things you're talking about. It's like I wonder if they are like the binaural tones.
And what was it? Say that again, Fernando, that last part.
The binaural tones.
Did you understand him, Jeff?
I didn't quite catch it. No, I'm sorry.
Well, you were talking about the sounds to enter the theta state.
Yes.
It sounds to me like binaural tones.
Binaural tones. Beats. Yes.
Yeah,
what do you think of the
beats.
tones?
Yes. And there certainly is a relationship between the binaural beats and the technology I was describing. Binaural beats operate a little bit differently because...
And explain what they are, Jeff.
Sure. So binaural beats is an audio technology where you have headphones on and there is a certain frequency in one ear and there's a different frequency in the other ear. It's offset just a little bit. And what happens is your brain magically subtracts the difference between those two frequencies. And so it produces a phantom brain rhythm to match that. So it is kind of an entrainment technology, and it is a way to kind of shift the brain into a specific brainwave state. It's just a slightly different technique than what I was describing earlier, which is, the thing I was describing is called isochronic. It's an isochronic tone. So it's just the same tone. It's not two different tones that have to be subtracted. It's just a repetitive single tone. But they're related technologies. And yes, binaural beats can also be effective to help shift the brain into desired states. It's particularly good for relaxation, which actually is important for these abilities to be relaxed. So sometimes that's enough for people. If they can just relax a little bit, then some of these abilities can naturally kind of move forward.
Jeff, what is it when you're thinking about somebody and all of a sudden they call you or they text you? And I mean, and it just pops up almost instantly when you're thinking of them. Are we transmitting something to them or what happens?
Yeah. I, of course, don't know for sure, but that's what seems to be happening. My sense is from what this is just my interpretation of how things work, is that all of the information is out there. Everything is out there. And it just depends on what you're paying attention to or what you focus on. And so my sense is that if there's somebody that you're close to, you've got a strong relationship with, a strong connection, you may not even consciously be thinking about them, but maybe they're in the back of your mind. And maybe that's enough, that you're tuned into their frequency and they're tuned into your frequency. And so, there is a resonance, and it gets a little bit to what I was talking about with future directions. How do we resonate with each other? How do we synchronize, energetically? And is there a way that we can measure that? Because I think it happens.
It does. Well, let's go to our wild card line, Rod in Syracuse, New York. Welcome, Rod.
Well, has he come up with an answer yet?
Well, we need a question first.
All right. I asked her, how would you know if you're psychic? Because I get all kinds of thoughts from my wife. I see signs. A lot of people say they don't ever see anything from anybody that passed on or whatever. I seem to see all kinds of things.
How do you know when you're psychic, Jeff?
Yeah. Well, we've kind of brought this up a couple of times in the conversation that to some degree, I think we're all psychic. And, one of the, I'm going to call it an attitudinal quality that seems to be important in developing these abilities is trusting. So trusting when you get information, especially if it's confirmed. So if you get some sort of a signal or you tune into information that just comes into your mind, whether you hear it or see it or just know it, and then it's confirmed to be true later, that we really need to trust that and start listening more carefully when we get those signals. And I think that's how we can start to discern, okay, what is my true intuition or my psychic abilities, and what is my brain making up stuff? And I think that's the tricky part that most people struggle with in this work. How do I tell the difference?
Right.
My brain's making stuff up or it's my true intuition. And I think it's exactly that, like really paying attention closely, and when you get confirmation of some kind of information, noticing what was that like? What did that feel like? What kind of signals did I get that can cue me the next time something like that happens so I know that this is my accurate perception?
When you're tuned into someone, like Rod was talking about his wife, and they have psychic abilities back and forth, does that enhance it?
In terms of like practicing it
or picking it up?
Yeah.
If you lived it with somebody for 30 years, you just become psychic with each other.
You do, and there is actually some research showing that the closer a relationship you have with somebody, the more psychically connected you tend to be. And, there's various studies kind of looking at that. And it actually goes back to what I was discussing before with the autistic individuals, because the person that they're the most telepathic with is their primary caregiver. And it's very obvious. And so, yeah, there is something that happens. We form these energetic connections, and we are able to sort of tap into each other.
Let's go to Stephanie in Eddyville, Kentucky. Welcome to the show. Hi, Steph.
Hi, how are you tonight?
Great. I hope you are too.
Well, yes, I am. I just wanted to call you and tell you about the crazy things that happened to me.
What happened?
When I was 4, I fell off of the jungle gym from the very top to the bottom.
Oh, my God.
That was my first head injury. As I got older, I had a 13 or 14-year-old accident. I fell off the back of the door to my grandparents' restaurant. At the age of 20, I had dreams that my baby was going to be born burnt. He was bleeding, and I thought, what is that? So I told my doctor, and he said, Stephanie, it's just because you're expecting. Well, that wasn't it. He was when he was born, of course, he was a boy. He had his circumcision, and he bled too much, and I had to get him sent back home. to the hospital, from home to the hospital. And the thing about it was that if my husband hadn't been fast enough, he would have bled to death.
Yeah. Is he okay now? And how old is he?
Oh, well, I'm 75. If that gives you any idea.
So he's got to be 40 or 50, huh?
That's right. My most favorite one that I was able to really, I'd say, put a star in my crown because I enjoyed doing it was I had went to the store late at night, and I worked in Evansville, and I got off about 10:30. I went to go back outside with my groceries and my purse and all that, and I saw a van sitting pretty close to my car, and the guy was sitting on the back of this car, and I thought, that's strange. I don't like that. So I hurriedly kind of kept myself on the right side of the car, and I threw everything into my car, slammed the door down, and started walking back up to the grocery store, and I made the man that owned the store come out, and he took the man's license number down and everything, and he made sure that I, made it off to town, and the police called me the next morning. We want you to stop by here. This man really did some terrible things. I said, what did he do? He said, well, he was out here stealing people's purses.
Oh, jeez.
Of course, and taking their food, and you happen to have his license number, and we need you to confirm it all. So I was so glad that I listened to my intuition.
And your psychic abilities, Stephanie. Can people have these abilities, Jeff, and not realize it?
Oh, absolutely. And, and I think it gets, some of that gets to this idea of belief. And so if people don't believe in these things, they're going to attribute maybe their psychic intuition to something else. Right? That maybe they just think they're super smart and they figure things out or whatever. And so, I think it's easy to misattribute.
Truly remarkable. But what you said was so poignant about trying to recognize the real psychic abilities that you have, or that voice that comes into your brain that isn't psychic at all. What is that?
Yeah. Well, and I think this is one of the tricky parts is that, there are, when we're doing psychic experiments, right, there's kind of two things that happen, and one of them is the psychic information coming in. But then that sort of logical, linear, analytic part of the brain almost can't help itself.
It tries to override everything that's happening. Jeff, stay with us. We're going to come back in just a moment and take final calls with you. Dr. Jeff Tarrant with us. His book is called Becoming Psychic. We'll tell you where you can get it when we come back. And welcome back. Our final segment, Dr. Jeff Tarrant, as we talk about becoming psychic. Jeff, where do people get your book?
Really, anywhere that you can buy books. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, any of those places.
What are you working on next?
Boy, we're really working on a system using heart rate variability to work with an entire group of people so that everybody can get feedback on their own heart rate variability as well as the entire group, so that we can use sort of a group biofeedback for group synchrony to kind of bring everybody together. So that's one of the fun projects that we're working on right now.
It's fascinating. Let's go to take final calls east of the Rockies. Joe in Long Island. Hey, Joseph.
Yeah, hi, Jeff. I'll have two questions, but also the Solomon versus Lord books by Paul Levine, legal series, have a savant as a main character in those books. My first question is on decision-making for upfront and personal problems. this book, The Neuroscience of You by Chantal Platt, is talking about the horse and the rider analogy, where part of the brain is like a horse going through the woods that's kind of making decisions that are a little bit more automatic, and then maybe the rider would be another part of the brain that's kind of overseeing that, the hippocampus being involved in that. And then it's talking about the idea of, are you looking at the forest or and the trees in the forest, or the forest as a whole? And then it's talking about how these cab drivers in London actually memorize the complexity of these streets, and how even when you park a car, the configuration can change by the time you go back, and then you can't find your car. That's happened to me. And I was thinking of even, like, a lot of us are cutting it close with decision-making. Even driving a car is dangerous. And I was thinking of that guy, Philippe, that did the high wire act between the World Trade Center and could have fell. I wonder what his brain was doing while he was doing that. The second thing would be on meditation from that book. It's talking about, it's saying that you go into an alpha waves, which is slower hertz than the beta waves, but that's where you say more stuff could be revealed and you can find out more about yourself. But then again, we're kind of taught that George C. Scott type of thing, where we're told to be tough and react quickly to the tiger, that type of thing. And another concept is the mantra, which is from Stop Overreacting by Judy Siegel. So you make an error, you're playing baseball. You could still insert a mantra saying, hey, I'm still a good overall athlete. Just make something up that will help your brain. I wonder if that registers on the brain too. If you insert a mantra that will be helpful to a situation.
Take the question, Jeff, about the meditation.
Yeah. So it's interesting because meditation has traditionally been associated with alpha waves. And what's interesting about that is if you simply close your eyes and relax, you're going to get a huge burst of alpha waves in general, because alpha is really associated with an internal focus. And so anytime your attention is inside of yourself, you're going to have an increase of alpha waves, which, of course, is partially what's happening in meditation. But there's actually a lot of other things happening in meditation as well. And so this is where starting to think about the other brain waves, theta, and gamma in particular. Gamma's the fastest brain wave that we measure and deal with. And what's interesting is it shows up a lot in meditation, which seems counterintuitive. We think of meditation as being all slow brain waves, theta and alpha, but gamma is actually involved a lot, because when there are certain areas of the brain that are activated in a way that you're kind of in the zone, where you're engaged at a high level but doesn't require effort, gamma becomes involved. So you actually see Tibetan monks doing a compassion meditation with these super fast brain waves. So it actually gets really complicated really quick which brain waves are involved, and it kind of depends on which meditation you're doing.
Indeed it does. Let's go to Tom at Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Hello, Tom. Go ahead.
Hi, George. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure thing.
I have always been psychic since I've been young. Things appear in my brain and then they happen. I also have experienced physical and things with spirits in an apartment I lived in. Something that was really specific that happened. I'm from Chicago and I live in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm 75. And when I was 40, I met someone, and we became superficial friends. And about 35 years later, I was at the gym, and I thought about him. And about maybe 12 minutes later, he walked by. And I said, are you from Chicago? And he said, yeah. And I said, were you a flight attendant? Yeah. Do you remember me? And he said, yes. And I said, I just thought about you about 12 minutes ago. And something else that happened, I lived in an apartment, and when I moved in, there was a very heavy glass cocktail table, and that started vibrating and shaking violently. And there was, at that time, I had a TV and a pine armoire with a door that was touching the glass cocktail table. And the armoire was shaking violently, and the cable man was there to install the cable. So I moved the door so it wasn't touching the table, and it stopped. But many things happened there. I would find puddles of water in the center of a room with I had the engineer and come in. He said, this is crazy. Then also, I had a cabinet filled with crystal glasses. Only one out of the 40 glasses would be shaking violently. The thing that happened that bothered me was I had this sound, and it was like Beavis and Butthead going, that would distract my sleeping. And I would check around. Nowhere else was it happening. And I sat down and I said, Spirit, you're welcome to stay here, but please don't interrupt my sleeping. And it stopped. Also, there was a door that led to the bathroom. You went through a closet before you went in the bathroom. And that door would always move about 4 inches when I would approach it to, make way for me. But I also pick up on things, and later in my life now, it happens, but it's not so specific. And then after the fact, I'm like, oh, well, I thought about that. And there are times when, certain times of the day when it's 9:08, I pick up on things at that time.
Anybody in your family, Tom, have these abilities?
Not that I know of. I'm all alone now, so I don't have anyone to communicate that with, no.
Jeff, what do you think causes the synchronicity when he was telling us he was thinking of an individual, and after all these years, the individual just walks by, for crying out loud? What causes that?
Yeah. I mean, there must be something in the field, right, that where our signals are
crossing.
Our signals are crossing, and then at least in certain circumstances, we're able to actually pull that into our conscious mind. My guess is that kind of thing happens all the time, but most of the time, we're not tuned in, we're not paying attention, or we can't drag it into our conscious mind in a way that's useful, right? But for whatever reason, certain people or certain timings or certain circumstances, it just kind of pops in. Like everything's in alignment, and you just get the info.
My theory is we're connected wirelessly with everybody. What do you think of that?
I think you're right. I think everything is interconnected. And then, that's the trick, right? How do you sort through it and actually extract the information that is important or that you're interested in?
Next up, Mark's with us in Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, George. You and I are cyclically connected tonight. While I was waiting earlier, I said out loud, George is about to do a Sea Crane radio commercial, and you did it.
Perfect.
Yeah, amazing. So my story dates back several years ago. I was sitting at home on a February night. It was about 20 degrees here in Raleigh. It was a weeknight. It was probably about 2 in the morning. And this thought popped in my head to get an old coat that I wasn't using anymore and just start driving my car towards downtown. So I did, and I drove to this spot where there was a man standing there with short sleeves shivering on the side of the road. And I held the coat out of the window to him. He took it, and he said, I knew you would come. And I said, well, I knew you would be here. And he said he had prayed for someone to come and bring him this coat. So I don't know if this was a spiritual thing or a psychic thing or a combination of both, but it was just an interesting story I thought you would enjoy hearing.
I love that. What do you think of prayer, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great story. I love it when those kinds of things happen. And as far as prayer and spirituality, I think they're actually really powerful, whatever you believe in. And I'm not sure if it is sort of divine intervention that is facilitating that, or the sort of focused, heartfelt intention coming from the individual. But either way, clearly prayer is powerful, and we know, and again, lots of research demonstrates that it works. And one of the things I find fascinating in a lot of the psychics and mediums that I've interacted with is that many of them find a very direct connection between their spirituality and their abilities. They're kind of one and the same. They're not separate things.
Not at all. Next up, let's go to Bradenton, Florida. Renee's with us. Hi, Renee.
Hi. Yeah, I've had a lot of extrasensory perception experiences since I've, at least knowingly, from age about 15. And I saw a neighbor get into an accident. I was babysitting for her kids, or her child. And I didn't see her fiance getting killed, but I saw her struggling to climb up a high bank, I didn't know what I was seeing when I was seeing it, but a high bank, and struggling and falling down. And then there was more in the dream. I was at her house, and I got a call at her house, and it was her mother saying that she had been in an accident. And I was just like, oh, no. So I picked up her daughter, and I took her over to my house and told my mom and my sisters what I saw happened. And it turns out, when she was well enough to call, exactly what I told my family, what had happened to her. And it was like a week before the accident, I had like a really dark thunderstorm feeling. Mm-hmm. And it was more like a feeling in the back of my head instead of like the pineal gland. And just a lot of things. My dad was in a coma, and I felt he had a clot in his neck. And I called and had him do a scan, and he did have one.
Wow.
Just a lot of things like that. And and off that subject, but I do agree that I think we all do have telepathic, ESP. It's just natural to us. And I was wondering one night when I was sitting there thinking about that, because I totally believe that. But I feel like there could have been one really bad guy in the very beginning that learned how to block his brain so nobody could read his brain. So I don't know. What's your thought on that idea?
Interesting take, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the thing that I would like to comment on is, you were talking about feeling the sensation in the back of your brain rather than the pineal gland. And, the back of the brain is actually one of the areas that we see light up all the time with psychics and mediums when they're doing their work. The very back of the brain, it's the occipital lobe, and it's where we process visual information. And so it's really interesting, because it's one of the most consistent patterns we see is an increase of gamma activity, that really fast stuff, in the back of the brain. So it's kind of like somehow we're picking up this visual perception, even though we're not, visually seeing things with our eyeballs. Somehow it's getting into the brain and being processed visually anyway. It's
amazing how it works. Jeff, we're out of time. I want you to keep in touch with us. You did a great job.
Thanks. I'd love to be in touch.
Dr. Jeff Tarrant, the name of his book, Becoming Psychic. Up next, we're going to talk about alchemy, and then we open up the phone lines at the end of the show.